Hey guys, welcome back to my channel, and welcome to my 2021 reading stat wrap-up video. So I'm really not going to try and make this dragged out. I'm trying to abbreviate this as much as possible and just go over the stats really quickly with you guys of all of the things that I read in 2021. In case you don't know or you were interested, I do have a spreadsheet video where I talk about my reading spreadsheet. I do have one that I am using for 2022. I used a very similar one for 2021, although my 2022 spreadsheet is a little bit more customized to the things that I prefer in my reading spreadsheets. It is available for you guys to download if you wanted to. It was very, very strongly inspired by a bunch of other different booktubers, so I will link that video either in the cards or the description box, whatever I remember to do. But without any further ado, let's just jump right into my 2021 reading stats. So as I've talked about in several different videos already, I did not quite make my reading goal on Goodreads of 100 books, but I did make 98, and of those 98 books, 27 of them were standalones, 70 were part of a series, and 5 of them were rereads. I guess one thing that I could talk about is I did go through and pick out a favorite book that I read every single month last year, and so in January, my favorite book of the month was Leviathan Wakes. February, my favorite book of the month was Foundryside. In March, my favorite book was Valor. April was Shadow of the Gods, so we did get 2 John Gwyns in a row. May was The Bone Shard Daughter. June was Project Hail Mary. July was Spoiler Alert by Olivia Dade. August was Head Over Heels by Hannah Orenstein, I believe is her last name. September was Winterlight by Kristen Britton. October was Iron Widow. November was a reread for me, and that was The Crimson Crown by Cinda Williams-Chima. And then in December, my favorite book was far and away The Emperor's Soul by Brandon Sanderson. So I'll pop a graphic up showing you guys how many books I did manage to read each month, but my best reading month ended up being December, where I did manage to read 16 books, which I think my second place is 11 books, and that was all the way back in January. I did also calculate how many pages total that I read in all of 2021, and that is 41,172 pages throughout the entire year. I also have a separate spreadsheet where I track how many books that I bought, and bought includes, books that were gifted to me, whether they were in book boxes or just straight up gifted to me, or I got them for free. All of those are included under this umbrella. So don't be too surprised when I say that I did end up buying 146 books in all of 2021, and of those I managed to read 47 of them. Listen, it's a percentage that we are working on. I'm trying to do better in 2022. As far as the genres that I read, I don't think anybody's going to be particularly surprised when I say that my fantasy was the most read genre of the entire year, with 62.8%, followed by sci-fi at 18.1%, romance at 10.6%, and those are the 3 genres that I talk about the most on this channel, so we're not really surprised. And then mystery, horror, and contemporary all equaled each other at 2.1% each. In terms of my star ratings, I do always seem to tend to rate on the higher side, and that's just because I tend to be pretty good at knowing what I will and I won't like, so I just don't pick up many things that end up being 2 or 1 stars. That being said, I did have 1 2-star, which I really need to go back, and I think that if I were to reevaluate, it would end up being a 1-star, but for now, we're just gonna leave it as is. 1 2-star book, 13 3-stars, 57 4-stars, and 28 5-star reads. If we're going to look at the percentage of where I acquired each of these books from, fortunately, the largest category was owned, as in I already owned a copy of it. It does not include whether or not I bought it that same year, but I do own a copy of it, and that is 44%, followed by books that I received an e-arc of from NetGalley, which is 30%. Next up is Scribd, which was 14%. And then Libby at 11%. Both of those are just categories of books that I borrowed either from Scribd or from my library on Libby. And then the smallest category was Edelweiss with 1%, which is another website that I get arcs from. In terms of the kind of rep that was available in all of my books, there was a decent spread among all of the categories that I tend to track, the largest of which is multiple, which means that it falls under multiples of the other categories that I am tracking, which is a good thing. We like it when multiple is high because it means that it's not just focusing focusing on one kind of representation. Not that there's anything bad with that, but we love more representation in our books, and that was at 28.6%. Okay, I lied. LGBT representation was actually more, and that was 31.6%, followed by books that ended up not having any rep at all with 15.3%, and then books that had racial representation with 13.3%, mental health representation with 7.1%, and disability rep with 4.1%. The next thing that I like to track is the format of books that I read and like the way that I read them. And again, I have a multiples category, which just means that I read multiple different ways of this book, whether I read it physically and audibly, or ebook and audibly, or ebook and switched it out with the physical book. Multiple is just a catch-all for things that I did in multiple ways, obviously, and that was 18.6%, but the highest category after that was e-arcs with 27.5%, which is good because I did fairly well keep up with reading my arcs on time last year. We kind of fell off at the end of the year there, and a little bit in the middle, but for the most part, I read and reviewed all of the e-arcs that I received in 2021. The next highest category is audio with 24.5%, followed by ebooks with 15.7%, and then 9.8 of the books that I read last year I read physically, and then finally 3.9% of them were graphic novels or comic books or manga. This last category is always interesting to me to track, but honestly not very surprising, and that is the age range of the books that I read. So 72.5% of all of the books that I read last year were intended for adults, and that is pretty much what I expected. I have started to get away from reading more YA. I just don't really connect to it as well. There are some books that are obviously an exception to this, and I read several of those and enjoyed them last year, and I did end up reading 24.5% of the books that I read last year were YA. And then the category that is always a little bit weird because it's really just a subjective thing for the most part as to whether or not it does fall into this category, for me anyway. If I think that a young adult book kind of verges a little bit on the older side, I will just categorize it for my own purposes into new adult, and that is the last category. And I read 2.9% of books that I categorized as new adult. In terms of the arcs that I received from mostly NetGalley or Edelweiss or wherever last year, I did end up tracking whether or not I read them, or if I told the publisher that I was not going to be reading it, or I DNF'd it, or I didn't finish it. So I did read and review 87% of the arcs that I received last year, and did not end up reading 13%. This does not include the couple of arcs that I have that have rolled over into 2022 because I did not finish them on time. In terms of the formats of the books that I bought last year, 68.7% of them were physical buys, 29.4% of them were ebooks, and 1.8 were audiobooks. Mostly because if I'm reading something audibly, I do tend to get it from Scribd or Libby or something like that. Now I do have an Audible subscription gifted to me for the entirety of this year, so I will probably be adding to that total when I do this again next year. But for the most part, if I can find it and not have to spend any money for it, I do prefer to take that route. Okay, so that wasn't too bad. Editing me is going to have a lot of fun with all of the graphics that I've got to pop into this video, but that's totally okay because I really didn't talk for as long as I was worried I was going to. This is mostly just for me. I don't know how many of you are actually interested in my statistics for what I read last year, but it is cool to be able to look back and see what I have changed from year to year, or what I am looking at from year to year in terms of tracking my stats. So this is honestly just a video that is really for me to look back on in the future, but if you guys are interested in it, or if you pull anything out of this that is particularly helpful to you, then I am glad. So that is it for my 2021 reading stats wrap up. I will link any of the books that I talked about. I know there were a couple down in the description box down below so that you can check them out for yourself if you would like to. Down there you're also going to find a rep code for Unplugged Book Box, which is CAT5 for 5% off any of their monthly subscriptions, right next to a Book of the Month affiliate link. And you're also going to find links to my Goodreads, my Twitter, and my Instagram in case you guys wanted to follow me on any of those. Don't forget to like this video if you liked it, and subscribe to my channel if you want to see any more content from me. But other than that, that is it for me today, guys, so I will talk to you in my next one. Bye!